Hey, what's going on, y'all? It's Blackwell here. I'm back with an Oscilio deck tech. I used this deck to win a local ProQuest this past weekend, so I want to go through my list and talk a little bit about how to play it. I will start out by saying that if you're looking to win your local ProQuest and that's your main goal, Oscilio is probably not your best choice. Aurora and Viserai offer very similar game plans right now and are able to execute it a lot more consistently. However, Oscilio is a ton of fun. When you're playing him, it really does feel like you're storming off with lightning and, creating these long chains that can end with doing things like a comet storm for 17 arcane damage, which is something I pulled off during the ProQuest. So anyway, I'm going to go through this list and talk about it a bit. So we start off with Oscilio. He is a elemental wizard hero, essence of lightning, and once per turn instant, you can discard an instant card to draw a card. So note that this is once per turn, both yours and your opponent's, so you can cycle on both turns. And this ability effectively allows you to put a lot more instant cards in your deck than you would normally want to do, because you can cycle through them. So it lets you play maybe a little more than normally you would want for consistency's sake, because you get some card selection. Now, some people say that Volzar is Oscilio's actual hero ability. What this staff effectively does is you can activate it to amp for the number of lightning cards you've played this turn. And if you have a sigil, you get to activate this for one less, so free. So a typical way a good Oscilio turn is going to play out is you're going to play a lot of lightning cards, then activate Volzar, and then send in a big arcane spell. Next up for the equipment suite, our main equipment suite begins with Flash of Brilliance. This blocks for 1, and it lets you discard a lightning card to return an aura you control to its owner's hand. Most commonly, this is going to be a sigil. Now, the sigils, which I'll get into a bit later, all have Leaves the Arena abilities. Sigil of Brilliance draws a card, whereas Lightning and Conductivity both make embodiments of lightning. So this will allow you to get the effect while also getting the sigil back to hand to either play again, cycle to Oscilio's ability, pitch away, etc. Do note that if you're playing this with Sigil of Brilliance, if you play a Sigil of Brilliance and then immediately block with Flash of Brilliance, discard a card, return the Brilliance trigger, draw off the Sigil of Brilliance, you don't actually net a card. You're effectively just cycling whatever card it is you discarded to Flash of Brilliance. So keep that in mind before you, think you're getting ahead on cards by doing that play. Next up, we have Spring Tunic. Spring Tunic is actually pretty important in this deck because your hands scale very well. So if you have a hand that just needs one resource to function, you don't want to have to be pitching something away. Most commonly, this is going to be used to have a big pop-off turn with Lightning Greaves. So let's talk about Lightning Greaves right now. What Lightning Greaves says is instant, you can destroy this, and instant cards you play this turn get go again. The way this works, if you're not familiar with it, is if you give an instant go again, because it doesn't cost an action point to play, but it has go again, it will net an action point. Typically, you're going to use Lightning Greaves to have one really big pop-off turn using either the cards Gone in a Flash or Blast to Oblivion in order to get Volzar really, really high. Next up, we have Aether Bindings of the Third Age. As an instant, you can destroy this, and whenever a sigil card leaves the arena this turn, you're going to amp 1. Typically, you're just going to get a little bit of value off this, block for 1, and then later in the game, you may activate this to get, 1 or 2 value from sigils popping at the start of your turn. However, if you have a big Blast to Oblivion turn, you can get this up much higher. So far, the highest I've gotten this is 5 in one turn. Because this is an instant, you can also potentially do some things on your opponent's turn. So, for example, I was able to kill a Viserai by activating this in response to a Sigil of Conductivity popping during my opponent's turn, because that, prevents arcane damage and then destroys itself, and then play an instant to kill them with the amp. Now, next up, I'm presenting the deck that I played at the ProQuest. However, I am going to end up probably cutting these cards in the future. I have Arcanite Skullcap and Arcanite Fortress. In theory, these cards are for Azalea in order to help stop a dominated red in the ledger. However, I think in that matchup, I'm just going to lean more on Oasis Respite and Sink Below instead of playing these. And then lastly, we have Null Rune Hood, which I would only bring in against Kano, because Flash of Lightning is effectively useless in that matchup because we won't be blocking, and I want to have another point of Arcane Barrier in addition to the one that's on Lightning Greaves. All right, let's get into the categories of cards. Starting off, these are going to be your attacks that have important effects. Let's start off with arguably the best card in the deck, Gone in a Flash. This is a lightning attack, 0 cost, 4 attack, 3 block, so already good rate. And when this attacks, the next time you play an instant card, this chain link, you may return this to your owner's hand. So if you're not familiar with this, there are different steps to the combat chain in Flesh and Blood. So what you want to do if you want to get the damage on this and then return it to hand is you would go to resolution of the attack. So after damage has been dealt, then you would play your instant and return this to hand. You do need to find a way to get action points or give this go again in order to get a big turn. So this is where Lightning Greaves would come in big, because each time you play an instant, you would get an action point and you would return Gone in a Flash to hand. So if you have a really good hand, you're able to do this, up to like 3 or 4 times with the same Gone in a Flash in one turn. Now, something that is important to note is that in order to return this and have dealt the damage, it means it doesn't work well with cards like Lightning Press or Channel Lightning Valley that are instants and care about dealing the damage. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is you don't get the best of both worlds. With Channel Lightning Valley, there's not a way to play this at a time where this will both deal damage and you get to return it to hand. The only time that would work is with electromagnetic somersault, if you're going to return Gone in a Flash to electromagnetic somersault's effect instead of its own effect. Next up, we have Blast to Oblivion. When this attacks, the next time you play an instant card, this chain link, you can return target aura permanent with cost 1 or less, or target aura token to its owner's hand. Now, the most common way you'll use this is to return your own sigils to hand and get their Leave the Arena effect. This is really strong, not just because you get that extra Leave the Arena effect, which, in the case of Sigil of Brilliance, that's drawing a card, which is great. In the case of Sigil of Lightning or Conductivity, you're getting an embodiment of lightning, so you're potentially able to, string together more attacks. However, it is important to note that you can bounce your opponent's auras as well if they meet that condition. So if you're able to give this go again, and you're able to return this to hand, so let's say you have an embodiment of lightning at the start of turn and you have an electromagnetic somersault, you can get this going pretty high. Once we get into electromagnetic somersault, I'll go through an example hand. Next up, we have Eclectic Magnetism. When this attacks, you may play a non-attack action card, this chain link, as though it were an instant. This lets you on, smaller hands, so like 3-card hands or potentially even 2-card hands if you have a tunic, play out your non-attack actions without access to go again. Because it lets you play something as though it were an instant, it can also be a great way to play around cards like Scowling Fleshbag or Face Purgatory, where your opponent can, use those blocks to try and snipe your non-attack action arcane damage card effectively out of your hand if they can figure, oh, that's probably the last card in their hand. They've got a Volzar up to 3 or 4. Being able to play it as though it were an instant means you can respond to that trigger. Next up, we've got sort of the Lightning Go Again package, the Lightning Attack package, let's call it. We have Flittering Charge. If you played an instant card, this chain link, it gets Go Again. We have Entwine Lightning, which gets Go Again if you fuse. Now, notably, this is not a lightning card itself. We have Current Funnel, which is a blue. If you've played a lightning attack action a lightning action in general before this, then both this and your next action get go again. So this can be a great enabler. It's also a blue. It's also a block 3. It's not the most exciting card in the world, but it is one of the best cards in the deck just for how well it ties things together. We have Lightning Surge. This one gets go again if you play it from Arsenal. And then we have Fry, which just naturally has go again, but only comes in for 3 and doesn't block. These are kind of your bread and butter of how you're going to build out those big hands where you go, 3 attacks wide and then play a big arcane damage attack. These are kind of the meat that'll make that up. Next up, we'll get into the Sigils. Sigil of Brilliance. When it leaves the arena, draw a card. This is one of the best cards in the deck. I think, a lot of games where you draw this early are some of the games that you are more likely to win. And a big part of that is because then you're able to get it back off of your Etchings of Arcana, which we'll get to in a bit, but those are, arcane damage cards with Surge, return a Sigil to your hand, and this is usually the best one to return. Then we have 2 sigils that are similar, Sigil of Lightning and Sigil of Conductivity. These both make an embodiment when they leave the arena. However, Sigil of Lightning automatically destroys itself at the start of your turn, whereas Sigil of Conductivity has Arcane Shelter 1 and doesn't automatically destroy itself. In a lot of games where you're not facing down arcane damage, it can still be great to get 1 Sigil of Conductivity in play just to make your Volzar activations free. Typically, once you have 1 in play in those matchups, you'll want to cycle away the other ones to Oscilio's ability or use them as pitch card, because once you have the 1 to get those free Volzar activations, they don't really provide a ton of value. Next up, we have Other Instants. Like I said, it's important to play a lot of instants in this deck because they trigger things like Blast to Oblivion, Gone in a Flash. They're also really good ways to stack up Volzar amps. So first up, we have Channel Lightning Valley. The first time you deal combat damage to an opposing hero, each turn draw a card. And then the way these flow counters work is at your end step, you're going to put a counter on Channel Lightning Valley. Then for each counter on it, put a lightning card from your pitch zone on the bottom of your deck. Typically, you're only going to be able to keep this around at 1 because this deck does not pitch a whole lot. Very few of our cards actually cost any resources. Another thing to note with Channel Lightning Valley is that it's the first time you deal damage each turn. So keep that in mind. Don't go playing your first attack and trying to save your Channel Lightning Valley for, enabling a go again on a Flittering Charge later, for example, because then you won't be able to get the draw card if the first one hits. Next up, we have High Voltage. This one's pretty simple. It's a blue, it's amp 1, so this kind of doubles up on Volzar because it'll give you an amp for Volzar and it itself amps. This card is really great for helping push your Surge cards past the point where your opponent can AB it down to Surge range. Next up, we have Electromagnetic Somersault, which is one of the best cards in the deck. It's an instant. It lets you choose up to 2 attack action cards with cost 0 or more on the active chain link and return them to their owner's hand when the chain link resolves. So this can be used both offensively and defensively. So if we're using it defensively, you could do something like, say, let's block, hit the camera. Let's block with Gone in a Flash and Eclectic Magnetism. So blocking for 6, and then we're going to use the Electromagnetic Somersault to return both to hand. So this ended up effectively being a block 6 on 1 card, because we're not actually using these cards, we're returning them to hand. This card also scales super well with Blast to Oblivion. So let me show you an example hand with Blast to Oblivion and a Sigil of Lightning. So for this to work, we do have to assume that you already had a way to give Blast to Oblivion go again. This could be from an embodiment of lightning. This could be from, maybe using a blink just to gain the extra action point. So, let's start, just to make this simple, let's start with assuming you have Blast to Oblivion go again. Or you could have used something like your Lightning Greaves. So we've already played the Sigil of Lightning. So you start off by playing that. Then we're going to play the Blast to Oblivion. So let's get our Volzar out just to show an example of how this would scale so well. So we play the Sigil of Lightning, Volzar's up to 1. We play the Blast to Oblivion, Volzar's up to 2. You play the Electromagnetic Somersault, Volzar's up to 3. That's going to trigger Blast to Oblivion, return Sigil of Lightning to hand. That'll make an embodiment of lightning. Once this resolves, we'll return Blast to Oblivion to hand. Then we'll play it again. Volzar's up to 4. Then we get to play Sigil of Lightning again. Volzar's up to 5. So then if your 4th card in hand is something like an Etchings of Arcana, we're pumping it for 5. And this is a pretty tame example. If you've had more setup, if you had like another instant in hand, or if you had access to more sigils, this can potentially scale even higher. So that's one example of the power of Electromagnetic Somersault when used offensively. Now, I will say that you will get hands where Electromagnetic Somersault isn't that good, so don't be afraid to cash it in just to, do something like return a Flittering Charge to hand, for example, and effectively just turn this into a 0 for 4. It's also worth doing it that way. Next up, Electrostatic Discharge. The next attack action you play this turn with cost 1 or less gets +3, and this is a lightning instant. This plays a little better with some of your cards like Gone in a Flash because, like I mentioned earlier, Lightning Press doesn't work well with Gone in a Flash, but Electrostatic Discharge does because you can return the Gone in a Flash, and then this would apply to the next one. So, yeah. Blink. This is a blue. It just reads gain an action point. Again, this combos very well with Gone in a Flash. You can just have a 2-card hand where you go Gone in a Flash, blink, gain an action point, return Gone in a Flash, play Gone in a Flash again. That's a simple, 2-card 8. Once you have other things going on, this can potentially scale even better. Sometimes it doesn't do a whole lot if you've got a hand that already has a lot of go again. Another way that this can be used that your normal go again neighbors like Embodiment of Lightning can't be used is to play multiple arcane attacks in one turn. Next up, we have Comet Storm Shock, which is sneakily one of the best cards in the deck because of how well it ties everything together. So this is a split card, so you can play either side or both sides. If you play one side or the other, it costs 2. If you play both sides, it costs 4 in total. One is an instant that deals 1 arcane damage to any target, and one is a action that deals 5 arcane damage to any target. The reason this is so good is it fills multiple categories in a deck that is normally a little bit prone to bricking, a little bit prone to consistency issues. So it blocks 3, it's a lightning card, it's an instant, and it's a non-attack action. So it fulfills multiple roles. Next up, we have Glyph Overlay. I just have the 1 copy in my deck. This will deal 3 arcane damage base, +1 for each sigil you control. And then if it deals more than 3, you'll gain a life and shuffle all aura permanents you control with sigil in their name into their owner's deck. So that would mean you get their Leaves the Arena abilities. I'm just playing 1 in the main deck. The main use of this in the main deck is to reset your Sigil of Conductivities. So like I mentioned, you can get those out to make Volzar free, but then eventually you can get around to your Glyph Overlay to play it for a big amount. In the main deck, I usually don't want to ever draw more than 1, so that's why we're just keeping it at 1. Next up, we have Etchings of Arcana. At red, it deals 3. At yellow, at red it deals 3. At yellow, it deals 2. If it deals more than its base damage, you'll return a aura with Sigil in its name from your graveyard to your hand. Because your Sigils, especially Sigil of Brilliance, are some of the best cards in your deck, this almost reads like Surge, draw a card, or in the case of Surge, for a Sigil of Brilliance, it reads, Surge, return potentially the best card in your deck to your hand. These are very strong and a great way to snowball early if your opponent is not able to prevent the Surge. Next up, we have Mind Warp, which is another Surge card. It deals 2 base, and then if it deals more than its base, the opponent will shuffle their hand into their deck and then draw that many cards -1. This is a very important disruptive tool against other aggressive decks, so I'm talking like Viserai, Aurora, KO, etc. that will punish them for either choosing not to AB or not being able to AB this enough. So if you can pump this up to 6, that's typically the realm where heroes are no longer able to block it out, because the most people typically play is AB3. Some people will be on Spell Void. For example, Aurora will commonly play Shock Charmers against you, which will give Spell Void too. But typically when people are on Spell Void, they pull back a bit on the AB. So that's the main deck. That's a 60 card main deck. Now let's get into the sideboard. Starting out, we have 2 more glyph overlays. I bring these in any matchups where I expect the game to go pretty long. So that would be things like Verdance, any Count Your Blessings decks, Bravo, and other Guardians, etc. The reason being, we'll just have more time to go through the sigils, set this up, and those matchups are often just about finding ways to push through damage, and because Glyph Overlay can potentially get up to a higher arcane damage level than some of your other ones that rely only on Volzar to pump them, that's why I bring in the other 2 copies there. Next up, Poison the Well. The next time a hero would gain life this turn, instead they lose that much life. This is for Count Your Blessings decks. We'll see how much they actually, maintain their place in the meta going forward. Maybe we end up cutting this, but it's very low opportunity cost because this is a blue, and we can cycle it away to Oscilio's ability. Next up, Lightning Press. This is an instant target attack action with cost 1 or less gains +3. This we bring in against more defensive decks, so any Count Your Blessings decks, Verdance, Florian, Enigma, for example, just to help us push through more damage. Next up, we have Null Shock. This is another split card. Shock deals 1 arcane damage to any target, which is the main use of this. I have killed people on their turn multiple times, either with this shock or with Comet Storm Shock. However, Null also lets you negate an instant card if it has cost less than the total arcane damage that you've dealt to an opposing hero this turn. This can potentially come up against Aurora or Enigma. I've yet to see it, so that's why this is only at 1, but I think it's worth it for the shock side alone. Next up, we have some defensive tools, Sink Below and Oasis Respite. Oasis Respite I almost always bring in if I'm on the draw, just to give me some more ways to not have a complete no block hand on turn 1, which is a situation you can find yourself in. You will often get the gain life effect as well, because you start at 36 life instead of 40. The other great thing about Oasis Respite is because it's an instant, if you draw it at an inopportune time, you can just cycle it away with Oscilio. Sink Below, on the other hand, I only really bring in matchups where I'm expecting the opposing hero to have a lot of disruption, and I need to counter that. This could be against Azalea, against any of the assassins, against Bravo. I also do sometimes bring it in against Aurora or other aggressive decks if I feel like I just need a bit more defensiveness. So that's the whole deck. Thank you so much for watching. I wanted to keep this a little bit short, not go too in depth. However, I do plan to follow up with another video where I go over some of the Oscilio combo lines, how to recognize when you have a really good hand, how to play out those hands, and some of the timing that goes into playing out those hands. Anyway, I'm Blackwell. Thank you for watching.